First thing this morning, students marched out of the Bronx High School of Science, crossed the street, and headed on to Harris Field.
This is what democracy looks like!
Today, they traded class for climate change action.
Change is coming whether you like it or not. The duty of change has been left to us, and we have no time to waste.
Rallying on some bleachers, they hope to educate the rest of us about what they're calling a real global emergency.
If we don't do anything about it, no one will, and I want to have a planet to live on and to grow up in and to raise my own children in, so I have to do something.
I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. The planet continues to warm up, resulting in increased natural disasters and plant and animal extinctions. Yet recent U.S. policies are turning away from minimizing climate changes to exacerbating them. While some of us may not witness the worst effects of climate change, younger generations will bear the brunt of our refusal to take effective measures. It's not surprising, then, that some students are taking matters into their own hands, speaking out for climate justice and demanding action. Today, I'll speak with student climate activists who were the organizers and participants of the Bronx High School of Science climate strike. We'll learn why they feel they must take charge and what they want us to do to save the planet and ourselves. Now on EdCast. Joining me today are Azalea Danes, Audrey Hill, and Sam Nesson, all seniors this fall at the Bronx High School of Science. Azalea Danes is the climate strike protest organizer at Bronx Science. Audrey Hill and Sam Nesson have participated in climate marches at Science, City Hall, and Columbus Circle. This past spring, my guests organized and participated in climate strike rallies that took place at Bronx Science and across the city. What is especially noteworthy about these strikes is that they were organized and planned entirely by students. Thank you all so much for joining us today on EdCast. I'm so happy to have you here. As I said, you were all deeply involved in climate strike rallies and protests. And what I want to know really is, why did you each get involved in this? So Azalea, as the organizer, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, sure. So it came kind of out of the blue. I just happened to be reading the New York Times, and I saw an article about Alexandria Villaseñor and her work with climate strikes and how she had mirrored the work of Greta Thornburg in Sweden. And so I got home that night and I did some research, and I watched a TED Talk by Greta Thornburg and her speech at the IPCC, and I was so moved by her words, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, how in the world is it that no one in my community, especially at a science high school, that I know, no one I know specifically is involved in climate justice activism? And I racked my brains and I could not think of anyone who was involved. And so I decided I had to do something about it. And so the next day I started planning the March 15th climate strike.
And Greta Thunberg is a Swedish teen, yes, who is
Yes.
advocating climate justice and climate activism.
Exactly.
Great. Okay. So let me ask you, Audrey, what got you involved?
I think it's so important that everyone our age gets involved, because this is our future. This is something that is going to impact us whether we like it or not. And it's so easy for people who are in power right now to make decisions that don't really address climate change because most of them won't be affected by it. And it's so deeply personal, and it's going to affect everyone. And I really care about helping address it.
And Sam, how about you?
Well, I knew about the issue already from seeing it on the news, and I did a little research when I first saw the advertisements for the strikes on Instagram. And that actually came at the perfect time, because it was just around the time when I started realizing that I don't have to wait to make a difference. I could do things now. I don't have to wait until I can vote. I don't have to wait until I'm an adult. That we together could actually do something about this. Mm-hmm. And the idea just kind of really inspired me, so I just kind of took it and went with it, and I just went to the March strikes, and I went to the strikes in May later, because if we don't do something now, then that's the end.
Well, let's be more specific then, because let's talk about why climate change is such a threat. Some of the specific things that we see happening around us that let us know that the clock is ticking and time is running out. What are some of the things that grabbed you, that were the salient features that let you know it's really bad?
So growing up, we've always heard about, how the polar bears are dying and the ice caps are melting and everything like that. But I think one of the main things that really brought me to attention how closely this affects humans is the cyclone in Malawi, and how an inland ocean formed, like in the middle of Western Africa, and Southwestern, excuse me, and how unprecedented that is. It doesn't make sense, right? Like an ocean formed inland, and it was one of the first recorded incidents of weather catastrophe that was directly caused by climate change, because storms of that size have never occurred before.
And how about the two of you? What struck you?
Well, climate change, part of it is that natural disasters will be more intense and more frequent, and that poses a risk to a lot of different people, especially people in island countries and third world countries. And it can be really devastating. Also, the rise in temperatures could be really dangerous to our crops, which could lead to massive famine in the next 50 years. It's really scary.
Sam, was there anything that struck you?
Well, first of all, I kept seeing videos of floods on the news, and I kept hearing about the death tolls from these from these floods and natural disasters that kept happening. But then it started happening closer to home, and that really kind of freaked me out, because I have cousins that live in the Midwest, and this winter kind of the northern Midwest got a lot more snow than ever before in the past, unprecedented amounts. And then it all started melting, and it completely flooded all the cornfields in the Midwest. So for the first time, this is in the complete center of the country, and for the first time they had to evacuate their homes in rural Nebraska. That's unheard of.
Now, you raise a point that I'm going to go back to, only because there seems to be misunderstanding about this, and that is that sometimes the weather gets colder and there's a lot of snow, and I know that our president occasionally uses that as an explanation or a justification that there's nothing wrong, nothing's heating up. So can we explain to people who may still have some confusion about that, why even when it gets really cold, that is still a sign of a climate change that is not good? You want to explain that?
So there's a reason why a lot of people have started using climate change and not global warming, because it's more of more extreme fluctuations in temperature than entirely just a completely linear trajectory towards global warming. And you hear these stories about politicians walking into conference rooms and slamming a snowball on the table and saying global warming doesn't exist. And it's completely not scientifically based.
Looking at your T-shirt, science is not a liberal conspiracy. I think we always do well to remember that. So thank you. But as I said, you know that comes up, right? You said you heard the politicians say it. Okay, let's talk about your group. You have a mission statement. What is your mission? What is the goal of what you're doing?
Okay, so the Bronx Science mission statement, a few other organizers and I drafted that in the coming weeks before the first strike, the March 15th strike. And it's basically formatted like a general United Nations resolution, and it highlights all of our grievances against the United States government as well as our particular school community, and then it addresses what we can do to amend those things to address climate change and fight for climate justice.
And what have been the demands that you have? I know you have some demands, things you want to see done.
So one of the main things is to stick to the Paris Agreement Accords, and to align with all of the clear scientific facts that climate scientists have come up with, and to stay below the 2 degrees Celsius before post-industrial periods in the next, which has to be really begun now so that in the next 12 years that can be repaired before it's too late. The hardest thing with this so far has been getting people to pay attention and getting people to show up to these things, because like, believe it or not, and it like pains me that this is such a problem, but like, you can give people all the information and all the facts and like such a clear layout of schedule of things to show up to, and they still don't come because they don't think it threatens them like in the present. Which is why like the larger organizations like Fridays for Future that we see in the country that are really global organizations are really helpful to contribute to the cause.
Well, I certainly would have to agree that adults can really try to, there's a whole, swath of the population that really is able to kind of ignore what's right in front of them. Of course, young people, the ones that you're trying to encourage, what's the way of reaching them? I mean, how do you get your own group active?
Well, I think social media can play a big part. It's really effective mobilizer to an extent, because I was involved in gun control activism for a while last year, and what's really tough with any movement is keeping the momentum going.
Right.
Like, at first it's really public, people are paying attention, and people really care a lot because a lot of the optics, and then it's hard to keep those people interested and passionate, and it's just it can be really hard.
I'm sure. All right, let's talk to that question that I'm sure you've been asked before. Why revert to a strike as a strategy? It seems very drastic. Why use strikes?
I mean, I think drastic is exactly the correct word to describe it, because that's the situation we're facing. So by playing the strike card, like the rebellion card, we show that we have no other choice but to strike. Like, I would much rather be in school. Well, I would much rather be in school.
Qualifying that, and I'd much rather be in school.
And my junior year of high school, I'm supposed to be in school and studying and doing all of my homework and getting ready for college. But instead I chose to put all of most of my time and energy into helping to organize these strikes and being a part of this movement, because it really is just so much more important.
On a sort of positive note, I guess, Mayor de Blasio rolled out a major climate initiative, New York City Green New Deal, and he has goals to reducing the city's carbon emissions, ban plastic bags, use clean electricity. What are your thoughts on this? Hopeful?
Definitely hopeful.
Yes.
It's really great. It's a step in the right direction. I mean, obviously it's not the final step, but it's definitely something that we should have done a while ago. And also, now that the New York State Senate, as well as the Assembly, were taken back by Democrats in the midterm elections, they have been passing a lot of legislation, and recently they just passed legislation that has to do with climate change, and it's also it's the state, so it's on a bigger scale, and there are definitely government actions not on the federal level that are stepping in the right direction.
Now, one of the issues, and I guess it's the trump card that Trump plays, has to do with jobs and fossil fuel sectors like the coal industry. If you clamp down on coal, he recently rolled back clean air regulations pertaining to coal. But of course, he's doing this because there is a genuine loss of jobs in these sectors. And what do you say to that? How do we address that? I mean, that's a legitimate concern that people have for the immediate,
Well, think of it this way. That he's concerned for the rights of the fossil fuel workers now. All workers have a right to a secure future, and that's in jeopardy if you don't
If you don't pass green resolutions, then they're not going to have
A place to work.
They won't have a place to work in the first place in the future.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's really a matter of now versus later.
And also with
few versus all.
Yeah, exactly. And also we need energy, right? So the fossil fuel energy that is currently being consumed is surpassed by renewable energy, and that there are jobs that are replaced in that sector. And it's an arduous process, and it's extremely difficult, but it's not a matter of how hard it is. It's just a matter of, at this point, it just has to be done.
Right. Yeah. So begin to retrain, begin to emphasize different jobs in different energy areas. Well,
I mean,
go ahead.
coal mining is just, it's not a sustainable job. It's not a renewable resource.
And it's unhealthy.
Exactly.
Like, for the person.
It's unhealthy for the people who are mining. It's unhealthy for towns surrounding. It's not a good thing. And what we should be doing is focusing our resources on retraining people and providing subsidies and
like shifting to that concept that like renewable energy is the future and it is where we have to go. And that really just has to be led by the corporations and the industries that that just lead it and just switch to renewable energy in the first place.
Let's talk about some of your protests and your rallies. There have been a number of them. There was one in March and 2 in May?
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about what they were, what they sought out to accomplish, what did they accomplish? Did they build on each other?
Right, so in conjunction with those 3, there are people that strike at the United Nations every single Friday, which is wonderful. And so March 15th, all of the protests focus on gaining as much attention as possible and media attention. March 15th, we definitely accomplished that. There was like a full media saturation of regarding the climate strike. And then of course like interest was lost, but after the May 3rd climate strike, which was the smallest one out of the large ones that we had planned, the New York City climate initiatives were passed like shortly after, which shows that like our work really does make a difference, and it shows like the politicians are doing something right. They're listening to the people that are going to be voting for them in the next 2 years.
Okay, well, that's important. All right, now I want to, recently a group of young people actually sued the U.S. government over climate change. I found this fascinating. The lawsuit is named Juliana versus the United States. And the plaintiffs say, I'm going to read you a quote now, they risk being deprived of their, quote, rights to life, liberty, property, and public trust resources by federal government acts that knowingly destroy, endanger, and impair the unalienable climate system that nature endows. Now, of course, the federal government wants this suit dismissed as quickly as possible, and there were arguments heard on June 4th whether or not young people have a constitutional right to be protected from climate change. Without asking you about the legality of the case, I just want to know what's your thought about this?
I mean,
did you say yay? I mean, what did you think?
I mean, I think that they are correct, that it is, their constitutional rights are being violated, because even if it's not the government that is like directly threatening their rights to life and liberty and property, climate change is a threat to those things. And when the government is not acting, even though it can, that is a big problem, and that could be considered like indirectly depriving them of those things.
Should be arguing the case. Interesting. Any other takes on it? Any other thoughts on it?
Yeah, there was a really large petition to garner support for the case that like I signed. I don't know, if you guys signed as well. And I don't know, I think it wasn't publicized enough as it should have, because there like the immense media blackouts are such a problem regarding climate change. But yeah, I think they're doing an amazing job, and watching this case grow from when it started in like 2015, I believe, and like seeing all of the plaintiffs really become like forces of their own will in combating climate change is really wonderful. And it's so excellent that it's brought to such a large scale, and that case like affects the justice system. So we have like the justice system over here, like the media being handled, like local governments, and that's the important thing about things like this, is that climate justice is such a broad issue that it has to be attacked from so many different angles.
So let me ask you, I mean, every day that I pick up the paper, there's another negative thing that the federal government is doing to make the climate worse. So how do you measure and know if you are having any positive impact on this, or do you feel you are, and what do you think?
I think seeing if the House has like had hearings about it, if there's been any legislation passed, but also like seeing if there's more things in the media, seeing if there's just more awareness about it. I think that those are all measures of success.
Are you seeing any of that, Sam? Are you seeing anything that gives you some hope, or?
Well, I always notice that there does tend to be like a spike in things being passed directly after a strike, and that's actually a great motivator, that we see that there's change happening directly after. Even if it's small steps, it's still a step taken in the right direction, and the more the more we do, the more steps will be taken. So.
Yeah, I think I don't know, I've always believed that like in any situation you just like the best you can do is to try as hard as you can.
Yeah.
But like especially in this situation, like the best we can do is for everyone to be trying as hard as they can. And like not everyone is, because people are unfortunately extremely apathetic about things that matter a lot to everything. But I think that every time that one of us like starts a conversation about climate justice, like that's a step in the right direction, because it gets someone else's gears turning and thinking about the things that they ought to be thinking about on a regular basis.
Well, yeah, again.
Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez proposing the Green New Deal, she said that she didn't really think that it was going to pass, but she wanted to start a conversation.
Exactly.
And I think that's also really important, because we need to be finding creative solutions to deal with this problem.
So in terms of everybody doing something, you're also taking this to a very local level, looking at your own school and your own school building and thinking of how there can be environmental changes just at that local level of the school. What are you proposing for Bronx Science itself to become more climate friendly?
Yeah, so that was actually part of our original mission statement. So we're in conversation with the Department of Education, the School Construction Authority, and just like the Department of Sustainability. And so we're pushing to expand our usage of solar panels. We have solar panels already and we are very well equipped, but there are many initiatives that need to be taken further, such as like power off all the computers over the weekends, making sure all the lights are off, simple things like that. And eventually a major goal would be to switch to a different kind of boiler, a summer boiler to heat the building. It's more efficient and runs on, you know, if possible, a more efficient type of natural gas.
Just thinking that I probably don't power off my own computer very often. I keep it on, it's usually on all the time.
And the thing is, like, as much as it's important.
It's just my little computer.
Yeah,
How could
right?
that affect anybody?
No, but the thing is,
millions of people have that mindset.
Yeah.
Of course, exactly.
And that's why,
No,
like,
right.
and that's why I think, like, I don't know. When
I guess that's the point, right? Well,
Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
And what I've seen a lot, especially like, you know, with everyone like buying metal straws and everything, is like, I like legitimately like do not care like how vegan you are or like how much trash you consume, because at the end of the day, like, it's not our fault for like living in a society that produces this. It's like the people at the top that
there's a tendency to blame it on individual people, like, oh no, you took a 10-minute shower instead of a 3-minute shower. But really it's like the 100 corporations that are causing like 70% of pollution right now.
Much bigger than, right.
I think sorry.
No, go ahead.
I think we need to just find a balance between having individual responsibility and then also holding corporations accountable.
We are running out of time, but I do want to say that I recently came across some more information that said that while 86% of teachers agree that climate change should be taught and that parents want it taught, in reality, it is not really taught all that much, and that parents don't really advocate for its being taught or talk about it too much at home. So what do you think about climate change education? When should it start? When did it start for you? Did it start in high school, middle school, earlier?
We haven't really been taught a ton in science.
Absolutely
Is
not.
that true for all of you?
Yeah, really, it's most of what we learn has just been from like the occasional news story and self-taught online.
Okay, so then it has not really been, so
It
would
has
you
not.
say, so then it obviously seems to be a need to really get it into the
yeah,
curriculum?
it's vital. We have I have some
Necessary.
projects working on that right now.
I'm going to ask you
luckily.
just each quickly about your support at home from your family. Yes, no, tell me what's family support like and what do your parents say?
My parents support me in everything that I do, so although they're a little annoyed about me having to skip school every now and then, they are slowly beginning to understand why this is like more important than my attendance record. And it's definitely like frustrating for me to try to like have to corroborate that, but it's like, you know, like what else can I do?
Sam, how about you?
I'm very
Support?
lucky to have parents who also support like me in what I do with this and also agree with me on this.
Good. And Audrey?
Yeah, my mom is very supportive of what I do. but also she does get a little bit nervous when I have to study. But I mean, I do too. It can
Right.
it can be hard because we go to a hard school,
right?
but
It takes time to make a change and make
yeah,
a difference.
but
Well,
it matters so much. So
I want to thank you all so much for joining me today, Azalea, Sam, Audrey. I'm hoping that this conversation will also help fight some of the apathy out there and have people understand just how important this is. So thank you again for joining us today on EdCast.
Our pleasure.
of course, thank you.
Don't go away. We'll be right back with our Ed Bites. Welcome back to this edition of Ed Bites. The recent college admissions scandal focused on wealthy, often celebrity parents who use bribery and other scams to get their children into college. Inside Higher Ed reports on a CNBC poll that tried to assess just how much money millionaires actually spend on college entrance endeavors. Results? Most report spending under $1,000, but 20% of those under age 55 with at least $1 million in investable assets spent more than $50,000 to get a child into college. Debates on teacher salaries often compare teachers to others with similar degrees, or seek to determine their value in some measurable way. While we can point to intangibles such as instilling a love for learning, researchers say teachers provide tangible benefits as well. NPR Education reports that good teachers can make a lot of money, but for other people. Economists from Stanford, Yale, Columbia, and Brown found that a top teacher can increase the lifetime earnings of a class of 20 by $400,000. Their conclusion is that the best teachers are underpaid and more should receive six-digit salaries. True or false? As their critics contend, charter schools drain, siphon, or funnel resources away from school districts. Chalkbeat says true. According to their research, charter schools really do divert money from school districts. Those districts can compensate by cutting costs over time, but that process often results in closing schools to save money. In 2015, EdCast examined the use of restorative justice as a better way of dealing with school disciplinary issues. Its practices are meant to allow victims and perpetrators to reconcile and agree on some sort of amends for the injured party. Restorative justice was viewed as a promising alternative to suspensions and expulsions. But the Heckinger report cites two recent studies that do not show clear benefits for these non-punitive approaches, and even some negative effects. The programs are difficult to implement and require much professional development, which may account for some of the results. EdCast will take another look at restorative justice in an upcoming program. That's it for this edition of EdCast. Join us next time for more important conversations about education.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to cunyedcast@gmail.com.